All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the 5 o'clock hour. I want to introduce myself. My name is Mark Lacido. I'm a member of the Sanford Veterans Association. And on behalf of the Sanford Veterans Association, I'd like to welcome you to the first event in our speaker series, The Truth of Transition. A couple of housekeeping items to get out of the way. Special thanks to Duke student veterans and to the Duke Armed Forces Association in partnership with the Sanford Veterans Association. Couple of rules of the road here. So first, keep yourself muted to avoid any audio interference there. Starting now, you can begin to type your questions for the question and answer session into the chat. You're going to want to address those to Gia DeHart. And when the question and answer session starts, she'll cue you to unmute and tee you up to ask your question. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest, Major General retired Clayton Hutmacher, retired in 2018 from a 41-year career in the United States Army. His background is in special operations and aviation. His last assignment in the Army was the Director of Operations, the J3 at US SOCOM. And he currently serves as the CEO and President of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. He's also been a lifelong mentor to our second guest. Please welcome Major General retired Clayton Hutmacher.
Hey, thanks very much for having me, Mark. I appreciate it. And it's actually my son goes to Duke, so there's a little family connection. And since he's drained the coffers of of our bank accounts to get to where he's at, I'm happy to give back to you guys. And Sean I have not been a lifelong mentor, so I take no, I'm not accountable for his lack of progress in that area. He still remains a work in progress for me.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for joining us, and we won't hold you accountable for Sean's shenanigans. So our second guest is Colonel retired Sean McCrae, who retired in 2020 from a 21-year career in the United States Army, who has a background in special operations. And his last assignment was as the Deputy Commander of the 3rd Operational Support Group. And he was a former Chief of Current Operations for the Joint Special Operations Command. And he currently serves as the Chief of Staff for a consortium of aviation and technology companies. Please help me welcome Colonel retired Sean McCrae.
All right, it's a pleasure to be here. And any mess ups I have, I will solely blame on Clay for his lack of mentorship over the years. But no, it's a pleasure to be here. Certainly transition is, not too far distant in my past. So a lot of lessons learned there, some of them the hard way, others that mentors provided to me. So I look forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let me just set the floor for you a little bit. We've got representatives from across the Duke enterprise representing the Sanford Veterans Association, Duke Student Veterans, the Duke Armed Forces Association, Duke Law Veterans, as well as affiliated faculty and ROTC cadre. So that is the audience that we've managed to wrangle up here tonight. We're all looking for the pearls of wisdom that you have to offer. First, I'd like to just give the floor to each one of you, to Clay first, to talk about the mission of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, and then we'll immediately transition over to Sean, give him the floor for a second before we jump into discussion.
Okay, hey, thanks, Mark. Real quick, so the Special Ops Warrior Foundation has really two primary missions: provide immediate financial assistance to severely wounded, injured, or ill special operators, severely defined as, or special operations personnel, defined as inpatient hospitalization is the way we sort of characterize it that way. But our main effort is to provide holistic funding for the children of fallen special operations personnel killed in the line of duty. That's an important distinction. and to the children of all Medal of Honor recipients, which is why I'm in Fort Worth right now to meet with some recipients on that. And we started in preschool by funding preschool, and then tutoring all the way through, unlimited tutoring all the way through mentorship programs, college prep programs. And we fully fund their college, whether they go to a institution like Duke or an Ivy, or they decide to go for a technical type of field at a community college. Wherever their passion and potential takes them, is what we will fund. And it is a lifelong commitment to us. We currently have over 900 children in the program. Some of them are just a few months old. Our youngest is Dustin Gabriel Ard. His father, Dustin Ard, was a third group sergeant first class that was killed last year. His son was born several months after he was killed. So he'll be with us until 2042. Is the way we look at it. That's his projected college graduation date, assuming he goes that way. We also have a program for special needs children. We have about 15 or so that have very unique requirements that don't fit into what we would call a traditional education pipeline. And so we fund those, and we're very flexible on what that is. In fact, I'm the approval authority, and sort of have me at hello kind of thing on that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. What I would add before I pass the mic to Sean is I really didn't see myself in a nonprofit. That wasn't, I'm an aviator. I didn't really want to go to Boeing or Lockheed or something. But I figured, I quickly figured that that's sort of my value proposition, right, to companies. But when this came open, I almost said no, frankly. And then I said, well, never say no. And that's one of my lessons. Never say no. I always say I want to learn more. And I tell you, from an unlikely quarter, this has been an extremely satisfying job for me. And I mean, I have no problem coming to work every day. I really enjoy it, and we're having an impact. So anyway, you never know where life's going to take you, and I suspect many of you will find the same thing. So back over to Sean.
Hey, thanks, sir. Yeah, so as Mark indicated, I'm the chief of staff for a series of companies. I was not an aviator, nor was I a technologist. I was an infantryman. I'm the last person that you would want coding anything, and they would certainly never allow me to fly anything. So, is the ability to be able to, transition out into the civilian sector. I was going to say it later. I would tell you my biggest lesson I've learned to date is that the leadership skills, the organizational skills, et cetera, that you learn and practice every day in service are directly transferable. I've yet to find a situation where I couldn't draw on something, quite frankly, in many cases that I learned at OBC as a second lieutenant or as a cadet at West Point, that wouldn't fix whatever issue it was we were dealing in one of our businesses. The biggest challenge, and this is another one I'll just come right out the gate with, and recommending many of you, this isn't an issue given that you're in Duke, is understanding the language of business, that being finance. That was the biggest hurdle I had to get over, was being able to understand what these guys that have been doing structured finance for 30 years on Wall Street were actually talking about. Because initially when I came on board, when they talked about a facility, I thought they meant a physical warehouse. Not literally, but that was kind of where I started from, and being able to understand, what they were talking about. So then you could bring those lessons learned into the equation. But all that to say, there are many organizations out there that help with transition. I went through a couple different organizations, which I'm happy to talk about. The biggest recommendation I would have for anyone is find the one that speaks to you. The first couple I went through were all great Americans trying to help folks transition. They just didn't speak to who or what I was thinking I wanted to do. And I found one that did, and they started with asking me to sit down and plan out my ideal path for my life, which I'd never really done. And my wife and I took it seriously. I'm married, been married for almost 20 years, got 4 kids. We spent about 3 days and went through that. and said, where do we want to be in 20 years, assuming I'm still kicking then? And we got into pretty great detail on that and took it back to the organization. And they didn't say, hey, that's great. You look like a entry level program manager. They said, okay, let's figure out how to get you where you want to be. So the point of all that is there are many different organizations. You got to find the one that speaks to you. You can absolutely shop them around. But take solace in that all of your skills that you did as a leader in the military directly transfer, no questions asked. That is a consistent theme that I'm reminded of daily. But I'll pause there for pass it back to Mark.
Yeah, gentlemen, thanks. I appreciate those two intros, and I just want to take an opportunity to say, A, thank you for your service, and B, thank you for your continued service. I know each one of you have ties back into the military, and you're constantly providing services back like you are today. So thank you for that. And so first, I want to tug on a string with Clay for a second. You mentioned something about never saying no. That's an easy bumper sticker to remember, and I like it. But I just want to pull a little bit on that thread. We've talked about some of the critical decisions that you've had to make and that you've enumerated through your transition process. Wonder if you might take a little bit of time to talk about those critical decisions and potentially some of the hidden truths that you uncovered while you were walking down that path.
Sure. What I will say, the first truth is that, you should expect uncertainty and anxiety when you're getting out, right? I came in when I was 17 years old. I was a private E1 in the Marine Corps. I didn't follow a traditional path. And frankly, I'd never interviewed for a job in my entire life, when I got out. And I didn't think that I was really marketable. Yeah, I could be a stick wiggler and fly helicopters and all of that, but I really didn't understand how my skills, or didn't appreciate how my skills would transfer over to the civilian sector. And like Sean said, Sean and I actually work together. I'm allowed to do some boards on the side, and I'm on the board of the company that Sean works for. That they really do translate over. It's absolutely is a different language. And you have to make a mental transition and understand. And the analogy I would use is, I've flown a bunch of different aircraft in my life. And when I get into a new airplane, it's like, I can't figure out how to start the damn thing. I can't do this. I can't do that. It's a different cross check when you're flying, and, the weapon systems are different or whatever. And it can be a bit overwhelming at first. But, pretty soon it becomes muscle memory, right? It's just the new normal. It's a new airplane. You learn how, and it's the same way, I think, when you make the transition to the civilian world, that it is a new language. There are, different TTPs out there, but in the end, it's not that hard. And the way I always look back on it is you look at all the people that do it, and you're going to meet a lot of knuckleheads that make a lot of money, and you're going to be completely shocked. How did this dude get here, or gal get here? It's like they're working without tools. So, it's not that hard, frankly. But a couple of things that a friend of mine told me early on, a retired colonel, he said, there's a couple of critical decisions that you have to make. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing every shiny penny out there, right? So one is, and I'll tell you the way I rank ordered these. The three things are location, compensation, and job satisfaction. And I rank ordered them, being in for almost 41 years, I realized that my marketability was limited, right? And that I figured, hey, I better make some money quick. So location was one, but compensation was two, and job satisfaction was three. I quickly learned that I had jacked that up. So job satisfaction is absolutely number one. if you remember when you got promoted from lieutenant to captain, that was like this huge pay raise. It was like $300 or something. It was like a big deal. For me, it was, you know, and I was like really excited. My quality of life jumped up dramatically. But then after like 2 or 3 months, you know, your lifestyle sort of adjusts to that, right? And it almost, you know, and it just doesn't have, it's not a, you know, it doesn't have that appeal or that satisfaction over the long term. And it's the same thing when you get out. So I think for me, if looking in a rearview mirror now, job satisfaction is number one. Location is number two, and the compensation thing just works itself out in my mind. I mean, that's really is not even a factor. And I don't know where Sean comes down on it, but I don't even really pay attention to that anymore. So those were the three things. And I mentioned it earlier, I would follow up with, opportunity comes from places where you don't expect it. I would hazard a guess that half of you will be doing something that you never thought you would be doing when you get out of school. So that never say no right off the bat, I think a good phrase to use is, hey, I want to learn more. I had a mentor tell me when I was getting out, because, I wanted to be a leader development guy. Everybody, by the way, wants to do leader development because we think we got the market cornered on that. And that's a crowded space. There's a lot of people that want to do that. But a friend of mine, I said, maybe I want to be like a nonprofit guy. And he said, well, and this is a guy, one of my former battalion commanders who works for Bank of America up in New York and does a lot of work with vets up there helping them. He said, well, just remember, nonprofit means nonprofit. I mean, you're not going to get paid a lot of money in a nonprofit. And because of that, I almost said no, but man, I'm looking now and knowing what I know and how much satisfaction I get out of the job, that would have been a huge mistake. I was a finalist to be the president of the Citadel, that was the first thing I looked at, and you never know where these things are going to come. So keep an open mind, especially if you're at a stage in your life where you can move and you can relocate. And my youngest son was a senior in high school, so I wasn't going anywhere. I was staying in Tampa. My wife was a school teacher. But I suspect that not all of you or most of you aren't in that situation where you're anchored to a specific spot. But those three, if you answer yourself those three questions, also, I would end by saying that scopes your search, right? So if you sort of figure out, those three questions, the location, the job title, and the compensation, and where they fit with you and what you want to do, it doesn't go from this overwhelming problem set or this all these opportunities coming at you. I think it's a little more manageable, I guess is what I would say. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Sean there.
Yeah, sir. I think, the guess that you hazard there about that we won't be doing something that we think we'll be doing when we get out of the military. I'd like to transition to Sean on that note, because, he's mentioned to me several times, he's not an aviator, he's not a technology specialist, but yet he's found, his niche in this chief of staff position. But Sean, we've talked at length about some of the challenges and the frustrations that you encounter on that pathway, whether it's where you think you're going or where you end up and you didn't expect to be. I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about the quote unquote field exercise that you went through to get to where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I came back from deployment, went to NICO, and then effectively had an empty notebook and said, okay, time to figure out what's next, the next chapter of the life. And I dove right in to starting to reach out to people and, network, things that I, quite frankly, was never comfortable doing, particularly the world that I came from for the last decade of my career. And so I sucked at it, to be really blunt right up front. And I'll get to the importance of that comment here in a second. And as I said, I reached out to a couple different organizations. Took a trip with one of them out to San Francisco. Thought I wanted to be in the tech world. I've always enjoyed integrating technology and bringing it to the battlefield. I thought I could do the same in the commercial sector. And I really quickly realized that I was figuring out up front the things I did not want to do, which as I reflect back on it and as I was part of that process, were just as valuable as identifying the things that I did want to do. And so that, that I would tell you right up front, don't discount those items. Don't look at it as a rabbit hole where you wasted your time. Add that to a column on things that, okay, now I know I'm not interested there. It's not the right fit right now, et cetera. But as Mark alluded to, I went through a series of probably 3 or 4 months of networking where I was doing, I don't know, on average, probably 3 or 4 calls a day. People were very gracious with their time. And one call, I'd have a discussion on, hey, you're exactly the type of leader we're looking for. I want to link you up with so-and-so who does our human resources and or executive recruiting. And then you talk to that person, of course, then you schedule the call, you do some prep, like good military person, you do prep before the call. So you spend time up front, you talk to them, and then they have a little idea on, oh, you know what? I think this might be your niche. Let me introduce you to this person. And before you know it, one phone call leads to 3 or 4 over the span of a couple weeks, which is multiple hours. And what I found is more times than not, and I mean this, I don't have any science behind this ratio, but I would say at least 95% of the time, what I found is folks with the best of intentions driving to put me back into a box of a retiring field grade officer. What they thought a military field grade officer should be doing in the civilian world. And that wasn't the space I wanted to be in. I wanted to totally break away from the big bureaucracy. I wanted to go do something fresh, learn new. And I was really struggling through these conversations to find somebody that would listen and hear that. So, I'd come out of the office after a day of calls. My wife would say, what in the hell are you doing in there? And some days I say, I don't know. I am literally, on the phone. And over time, I realized what I was actually doing was a couple things. I was figuring out what I didn't want to do. I was figuring out how to actually describe myself and my capabilities. And I was figuring out how to articulate what I did want to do and how I could bring value to an organization. And it's like now that I reflect back on it, you don't just get that by scoping it out on a note and walking out the door. It's no different than anything we did in the military. It's rehearsals, it's practice, it's training. You don't become the best marksman in the world by picking up a gun on day one. It takes years of training, hours with that thing in your hand. So that is what I found. And although it was frustrating up front, I came to realize and appreciate it towards the back end. I kept the faith that, hey, there is a purpose to this. And it was, by the time I eventually talked to Clay, who one day called me and said, hey, I got this guy that I'd like you to talk to. And that was about 4 months in, who is now my boss. When he and I sat down for what ended up being was supposed to be a let's get to know one another session, ended up being a 4-hour interview. I was ready to go because I literally logged hundreds of hours on these networking calls. Now, others may get lucky right out the gate and latch onto something. I'm not saying that's not possible, but for me, and talking to others that have retired, they've found a very similar frustration trying to work through it. And I now appreciate the process because it helped me understand the value that I could bring, and it helped me adjust my mindset because I wasn't there, quite frankly, right when I started. If I'm going to be objective and look myself in the mirror on that.
So, Sean, I want to interrupt for just a second because I think that knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you do want to do. So you mentioned that when you started your field exercise, we've talked about this, that they wanted to put you in this retired field grade box. Can you take just a moment to talk about where they were trying to wedge you in, and like what that looks like from your experience? What is that box they were trying to put you in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I'll start by saying, I always had observed people retiring, at least my experience in the last 10 years out of the special operations world. In many cases, I watched guys and gals go to, similar type roles in the civilian sector. And I always wondered, is that what they wanted to do, or is that kind of where they felt like that was really all they could do? And what I experienced when I went through the transition and looking for a job is, I had that, that little voice in my head. Well, you're really good at it. You've been, when you count West Point time, you've been institutionalized for 25 years. Maybe you ought to just go that route. And I really fought that voice because I didn't want to do it. The last thing I wanted to do was big DoD contracting. And for those that want to do it, it's wonderful. No issues. We need that, but that's not what I wanted to pursue. And what I found is the vast majority of the conversations I was having, even if it was a private equity guy in Chicago, somehow I'd end up down the little rabbit hole, 2 or 3 people handed off to different executive recruiters or people. And all of a sudden I'm talking to a guy who's like, well, I got some great job recs for you with Northrop to be a program manager, in wherever Idaho. And that, again, I'm not besmirching that or looking down on those opportunities. It's just not where I wanted to go. And it took me a long time to realize that there is not only a pull, your internal voice telling you, hey, you're good at this military thing, you ought to find something comparable out here because it doesn't necessarily transfer. There's also a push. There's a push, and it's not there's no malintent. It's not malice. But people have a perception, I found on the outside, that, okay, you're a lieutenant colonel, a colonel, a major, a former captain. Well, these are the types of jobs that you should be doing. And as I opened with, it's been my personal experience over the last year that 100% of the leadership skills transfer from the military to something that, just to frame it, and we just recently came out of one of our companies. It was a commercial aviation company that did structured finance for, everything from A380s down to business jets. Zero military aspect to that business. There's a technology component, and there's a whole bunch of Wall Street bankers that worked in our capital management section. Nothing to do with the military. But once I learned the financial language, leadership directly applied. So that was the type of thing I was looking for. Was I wanted to step out. I wanted something fresh. But as Mark was, trooping me there was definitely a push from people I was talking to push me back into that, more military box, if you will. And again, if that's the direction you want to go, know it, look for it, but beware that is, certainly something I experienced.
Yeah, Sean, I want to say thanks for sharing that. I think it's, it is important that we have people fill those roles, but it's also important that we, export, our leadership to other, sectors. So I want to thank you for sharing that. I do want to point out we're going to transition here into the point where we start opening up questions to the audience. I want to use the host's prerogative to ask the first unprompted question. And this can go to either yourself, sir, or it can go to you, Sean. You answer how you feel. But I think that because there's one of you retired at 41 years and one of you retired at 21 years. I want to ask about how you evaluate your value proposition each and every year over 20. And if it's readily available, what was that road sign that you saw that told you it's time to leave or time to join the civilian sector? So that's my question.
All right, so I see Sean's on mute. So, and I had an AD with my mute button here, so I'll start. Well, first of all, when you do 40 years, you're technically working for free, which my wife reminded me on a daily basis that, you're actually working for free. So that was that she had a special way of motivating me. I just felt like it was time. I think you've all checked the patriotism block. You're not, everybody in the unit, when you leave and, in the special ops world, you tend to stay in those units for a long period of time. And they always have something for you to do. But I think when you know it's right for you and your family to move on to the next chapter, it's a natural decision. My wife was like scared to death that I was going to go through this midlife crisis, after I told her I was getting out, and it just didn't happen because I was at peace with myself on a decision. I reached out to my boss. I was working for General Thomas, and I agonized over it until I made it. But once I made it, because once you say it, by the way, I mean, it's like a brand, right? It's like, it's a tattoo. And when you tell people you're getting out, you better be ready to get out. When people say, well, I'm thinking about it, I would just sit, because I've been in those conversations. I'm like, yeah, are you though? Are you really thinking about it? I think you've really made the decision. I mean, you're talking to a general officer here. So if you're telling me I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure that you're already on the road to that. You've already made that decision, so be careful when you say that. Don't speculate outside your circle of trust there, with folks. But I've never regretted it. And I found it, I love my time in the military, and I'm a better person for it. And I certainly took a circumspect, non-traditional route, and never dreamed that I would be where I was at when I retired. It wasn't a goal of mine, by the way, but it was a natural decision. And it could be because of family things, like there was one of the first females that we brought into the 160th. She just reached out to me on LinkedIn, and she did a great job. She was our first, that's when we opened it up, and she was our first one, and just crushed it. And she got out from a very, I think, a very good career potential. I mean, I see her, she certainly was talented, and she led the way in a lot of different things, but she's engaged now. She's living around Charlotte, and she got out because it was the right thing for her and her husband to be. So I think it's any number of things, and it's a personal thing on what drives you. But what I would say is there's always somebody saying, really, you're quitting? I wouldn't even give them that to me says something more about them than about you. I used to tell guys all the time that work for me, if you don't have an active duty service obligation, you didn't go to a school like some of you are going, and you've got a payback on the backside of that, you don't owe the government anything. You don't owe them anything. If the government thought you owed them something, they would give you an active duty service obligation. And that's why I always treated it. So do what's right for you. If you don't have that, you're obligated. If you're in a grad program or law school and you got to pay back to the military, then certainly you're obligated. But outside of that, I don't think you're obligated. And that's my opinion. And
that's great perspective. Yeah, that's great perspective, sir. Yeah. Sean, you want to take that one?
Sure. And if we'd done this a week earlier, you would have seen General Huntmacher with his ponytail as he just completed his midlife crisis. So he's just moved past it. But yeah, no, for me, it was similar as well. I mean, I'd been at a unit for 10 years. We were blessed to have stability there. Obviously a high op tempo, but I loved what I did. But it was going to be time to move on. And it really came down to my wife and I, having a honest conversation on what do we want to do with our family. And as I mentioned, I had 4 kids, and oldest is heading off to college next year, with trying to get them all through high school, and they're all healthy and stable and making good grades. I don't have any misfits or craziness going on right now. So we prioritized stability in the family, which quite frankly, after 21 years, the first time we'd done that, my wife had been right there all along, uber patriot. So for us, it was a family decision, and it was painful. I literally had butterflies in my stomach. Like I felt like I was going to throw up when I actually walked into the commander's office to tell him that I was out. And I was his deputy commander. I mean, I saw him every day, had a great relationship. I've known him for 25 years. In fact, I'd actually told him beforehand that I was thinking about it, and I told the commanding general the same thing. And they didn't believe me. They were like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, no, I'm really thinking about it. Yeah, you're not. And so when I actually went in to tell him, hey, I'm done. I actually did it after I submitted my memo to Human Resources Troop. So it was like done. I actually told him it's already done, just to make it a little easier on myself. But no, it was a difficult decision, but I don't regret it at all. That was the hardest part, was walking in, because I had that little voice feeling like, am I quitting? But at the end of the day, it was what was right for the McRae family, and I would not trade it for the world. I loved my service. I loved everything about it, but I'm having a blast on the outside. Very, very different, but wouldn't trade it for the world. So it really comes down to personal choice and what's right for you and your family is. And if anybody tells you different, they're crazy, and I wouldn't take much advice from that individual.
I really appreciate you sharing that. So now we're going to turn it over. I'm going to pass the baton to Gia DeHart. She's got some questions from the audience, as well as questions in the chat. Over to you, Gia.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to both of you for everything you've shared with us tonight. First, we're going to start with Andrew, who has a question in the chat. So when I bring up your name, if you'd like to ask your question, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and you'll see a little dialogue pop up. If you don't want to ask your question or you can't come off video, just let me know and I'll ask the question for you. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hey, thanks. This is for, I guess, General Hutmacher, or I suppose either one of you could answer. First, thanks for taking the time today. I'm still on active duty after 26.5 years. So we all get out of the armed forces, right? But thanks for letting us pick your brain. Regarding the statement, to never say no. This is the first time I've ever had the ability to at least think about saying anything other than aye, sir. And I'm looking forward to, being more discerning in what I do. So it doesn't not saying no mean you're going to be chasing that shiny penny all over the place. And you've answered that a little bit, but I appreciate you expanding on it a little bit more, sir.
Yeah, I guess I meant that, and you're right. It is. I mean, looking back on it, it could certainly look like a contradiction there, right? Scope it down, answer some questions, but never say no. I guess what I would say is that you shouldn't limit yourself. There's no harm in learning more. Don't make a snap decision. Like, I almost made a snap decision that I, didn't really want to get into a nonprofit world. I'd already was doing some pro bono work. I'm on the Gary Sinise Foundation board. I'm an ambassador for them, and, and things like that. And I would just say, you certainly, you may have your criteria. They say, hey, I want to stay in California, and this position's in the backwoods of Maine. Then yeah, clearly you can say no. Because that's just a non-starter with your family. And I'm mirror imaging a little bit because, with my family situation, that where we were at with a senior in high school and all those kind of things that, end up, driving the train for a lot of us later in our career, frankly. But it may come from an industry that you would never envisioned yourself in, Andrew. That's what I guess what I was a better way to put it. Like, Sean, he's an infantryman and he's in this aviation company, which sometimes I still get a little terrified about that. But the intangible things of what Sean brings to the table on leadership and things like that are what really carry the day. And I knew that. I knew that person when I went to Sean, So I would just say, don't have preconceived notions. Like, I'm only going to work in, I don't know, the bourbon industry, or some other way, or in finance. Because like I said, for most of you, I think your path will take you a different way, and you'll be like, wow, I never saw that coming. So I would just say keep an open mind. Again, there are absolutely no-go criteria here that, you know, I won't do this and I won't do that. But there will be things that come out that maybe strike you like, I don't know if I'm a good fit for that right off the bat, but I would say give that a little bit more of a look. You know what, and I'm gonna wanted to mention one thing, and I apologize, a bit of a divergence from your question. The size of the company you work for is a big deal too, by the way. You know, if you work for a Northrop or a Boeing, and I'm giving you aviation examples because, you know, I'm an aviator guy, but, or IBM or something, you know, that's a completely different experience than what Sean and I are, you know, what Sean's doing. You know, it's a very dynamic, and there's pluses and minuses for both. You know, a lot of security structure in a corporate thing, but minimal impact. The bureaucracy is that frustrated you in the military is just is even worse in some of these companies than it is in the military, which I didn't see how that was possible, frankly, but it is. And then but a small company, less security, financial security, you know, you're sort of blade running all the time, and but super cool with having an impact. So, you know, you got to factor that into your decision making. Of course, a medium-sized companies, you know, is somewhere in the middle of all of that, but of those two ends of the spectrum. But I found that, like, I have no desire to ever work for a large company ever. I just think it's much funner and to be in, you know, some cutting edge thing. There's risk, but it's a lot, you know, it's a lot more satisfying for me anyway.
Thanks, sir. So we've just gotten a ton of questions coming in the chat. So I'm going to call on Teddy next. If you've asked more than one question, if you guys could just pick your question, and if it's directed towards either one of our speakers, say who it's directed at so that we can move on and let everyone ask their questions. Okay, Teddy.
Teddy, you're on mute.
Got it. Hey, thank you, gentlemen. So real quick, I'm an active duty Army officer going to the business school here at Duke. I agree with the sentiment of not really expecting to be where you're at. I didn't really expect to be here 5 years ago. Now that I'm here, for both of you, some of the things you've said have resonated with me. First is that I've learned a lot about finance. And for the nonprofit, sir, does your organization have any sort of framework that they can tell people that donate, like, hey, this is what your return on investment will be? Like, hey, your dollars will be able to do this for these people in some sort of social governance structure. And then also on both for Sean, given that you've transitioned to like the finance sector, looking back, is there anything that you think that someone that is going to be a field grade, hopefully someday, can use that knowledge to communicate to decision makers, given kind of a finance training? Not that everything is finance related, but just given what you know, that looking back may be valuable. Thanks.
I'll go first. Beat you to it. Yeah, I mean, the biggest, I know it's a statement of the obvious here, but we don't have an endless supply of Benjamins in the civilian sector like you do when you're in the Department of Defense. As Mark and Matt know, I was not very concerned with the budget when I was in the service. I wanted capability, and I wanted to be able to use it, and I wanted it yesterday. You know, the biggest thing the biggest thing I've been able to observe out here that, you know, certainly would have been applicable in my previous life is prioritization. And that is something we live and die by out here in the business world, at least so far that I've seen, because at the end of the day, that money is not endless, and people's salaries and benefits, et cetera, are dependent on it. And there was no better example of that than during the initial part of COVID. being a new businessman and watching the cash calls each week as we work through that on multiple companies, and in some cases trying to figure out how we were going to make payroll. But the takeaway from that is, how do you prioritize the treasure that you do have? That's certainly applicable in the service at any level. And one day, when you become a field grade officer, it will be more so. But the prioritization, but not being rigid, it's a dynamic discussion there around that and being able to shift those around. But it's very, very clear. The biggest thing I would say that's transferable that I brought with me from the military side to the civilian side is communication. I thought that it would be impossible for certain stovepipes to be any more stovepipe than I found in some of my old jobs in the Army. I found stovepipes here that it just amazed me. And being able to make sure that people understand priorities and that you're able to communicate across an organization, that is something I deal with literally every day. And so I think that's, add on to your question, but that communication and making sure people understand priorities is really, really important from my perspective.
Next, we've got two questions that I'm going to combine. One's from Lauren and one's from Tim, because they're a little bit related. So Lauren wants to know, well, let me start with Tim. Tim said most of us are transitioning, we're all around 30 years old, and we're transitioning at a much earlier point in our careers than you both did when you got out. Did you find yourself having an issue competing against younger candidates that may have had more civilian experience? And then from Lauren, she would like to know if either of you experienced any rejection, either in the interview process or within your civilian jobs, and how did you handle that disappointment? And did it make you reassess your decision to leave the military?
Well, I'll start. First of all, my wife keeps me on latrine duty at home to this day, so rejection is sort of part of my daily life. So, I got rejected on that Citadel thing, right? Like, I didn't even want to apply for that. This guy kept bugging me to apply for it, and I made it as a finalist. And I'm not a grad from the Citadel, I'm not a 4-star. I was like, I got a snowball's chance in hell here. But, I like the idea of influencing young men and women committed to a life of service. And I thought that would be a lot of fun. And I think it would have been. And it was really deflating in the end. I made it to this final 10. I had to be snuck into Charleston to do the interview so the press wouldn't find out about it. It was like a blowout in the middle of the night kind of thing that I used to do, back in the day. But it sucked. I get this call, well, like, hey, thanks for throwing your name in the hat. But, their audacity, they went with a Marine 4-star graduate from the school over me. I'm still shocked over that. But yeah, you do deal with rejection with regards to competing with those with more civilian experience or more. And, I'm a big believer that leadership is absolutely a learned skill. And I think you learn every day. And I've learned a lot since I got out because the culture is completely different out here. It's more of a me world out here. And, I've learned there's no interest like self-interest out here. That's for sure. But I would say that, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave it at that and let Sean talk. I've blattered on long enough, and I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah, I didn't. My frustration was more I was struggling to get to that third conversation, if you will, with different parties, because I was very clear up front that I didn't intend to move my family, and that was a discriminator in many of the conversations I was having. But I was prepared to travel, and I what I was failing to articulate is, hey, I've over my marriage been gone for a little over almost 7 years to combat plus training time. So being gone is a normal way of life in the McRae household, but that doesn't communicate well to a civilian employer who's like, hey, I'm going to stay in North Carolina, but I'll commute to Atlanta 4 days a week. How's that sound? I think post-COVID, that's a different story now. I mean, I've spent most days in my collared shirt, ascot, flip-flops, and PT shorts on a Zoom call, not having to travel. And I think it's going to reshape the business world. But that was my personal frustration, was how do I get to that conversation where we're talking substance? And I just kept the faith, quite frankly. I kept reminding myself that this is a process and it's going to take time, and you just don't know where that opportunity is going to be. As far as competition, quite frankly, I was very comfortable knowing that I know how to lead. I know how to organize. I know how to break down difficult problems. I am not an expert in any one field, but I can learn. And so I wasn't concerned about, I wasn't applying for a very technical job or looking for things like that. So I wouldn't be concerned at all about the competition and age ranges. More important to me was, I found it with my current boss. Do my values align? Is it someone I respect, that I would enjoy working with and spending a lot of time with? Is this someone that is going to be a good work wife, for lack of a better term? And that's important. And I found that. And I would argue, don't sacrifice on that unless you absolutely have to, because it gets back to job satisfaction and who you're working. There are a bunch of self-interested folks out around here. It actually shocks me still, even though it shouldn't. But that core group of people that I work with, I really do enjoy. And that to me gets really high up on the list. And I would recommend highly that you strive to find that.
Thanks, sir.
Gentlemen, we really appreciate the candor and the depth of your answers. I'm going to give Gia one more opportunity to pull the shiniest question out of the batch. But as a good staff officer, I'm aware of both of your time, and we're going to move to closing right after this.
So last question, both of you have mentioned your families throughout your responses. Can you talk about what the transition's been like for them, and what has been some of the more unexpected things that you've encountered now that you're out and in the civilian world?
Well, for me, actually, I think I've had that transition a couple times. So when I went to the Navy Command and Staff as a major, I've been deployed. We were over, we were gone all the time over in Europe. And so my wife and I had 2 kids at the time. And so we go from this, 1,500 square foot mansion to this, Navy 1,200 foot duplex. And, now I'm underfoot. And, my wife's famous quote after about 3 weeks was, "Why are you breathing right now?" So whatever I did, I was in trouble, So, but then, after a couple of weeks, you sort of get into a new battle rhythm and you just sort of adjust. And I tell you, life is really good. I mean, I still travel. I mean, I'm in Fort Worth right now for, I'm going to go hang out with some Medal of Honor guys tonight, which will be cool. But, I look forward to getting home, and we have now time to do things that we didn't have to do before. And so that's been a changer for a big thing for me, is we have time to go see our kids. I got, like I said, I got one there at Duke, one at NC State, and another one in South Carolina. And we're able to go spend quality time, which which wasn't the case even when I was a J3. I mean, it was a grind. I was working 14 hours a day at least. So, hey, and I just wanted to mention one thing about that experience thing, and I apologize, digressing for a second. But to understand the different roles in a company, an HR person is that person that's going to look at your experience through a different lens than a senior leader. I mean, they are looking to get you, they're looking at experience and criteria. That senior leader is going to have a better understanding, that corporate person, of what you bring to the table, those intangible leadership things that Sean's talking about and that you all know exist. But the HR person is going to be the one that looks at your resume and says, do they have this? Well, this person has got 2 jobs and, this one only is just getting out of the military. They're not looking at the whole person and your character, which obviously I think the character is the most important part, but just understand who you're dealing with and their role in the company, because HR people are really flesh peddlers. I mean, they are just trying to fill positions and they're looking at you strictly through a resume.
Yep, agree on that. And I just to dogpile on that last comment, it's been my experience so far that you should not expect folks to look up and out of their foxhole across at a different silo. The HR person isn't going to think about what does finance really need. They're just going to look at the job rec, and that's what they're driving towards. I can't tell you how many times I had a senior person say, yeah, we need leadership. That's what we really need. And then they depart, and in come the recruiter and the HR person. And it's all right, do you have the right PMP on your resume? So there's a mismatch there. You just got to know it exists when you go into this process. As far as family goes, for us, I now go to sleep at night and I turn the ringer off on my phone. It doesn't ring all night. A couple weekends ago, we got a wild hair up our butt and said, let's go up to the mountains for the weekend. And we did. So it's those little things that have been great. I mean, I wouldn't trade the family time for anything. But like I said, we loved our time in the service as well. We didn't talk shop at home much. So in many cases, my wife is much like Clay's. Don't you have a business trip coming up soon? I've heard that a few times this year. So it's kind of hard to go cold turkey on high op tempo, but it's good. And it's if you look at it through a team effort lens, that there will be transition time, but it's a new adventure. It's exciting. I enjoy it every day. So.
Yeah, Sean, I've been able to turn my phone off while I've been at school. I look forward to turn it back on, but then also, retiring and turning it back off. So I just want to say, once again, on behalf of the Sanford Veterans Association, the Duke Armed Forces Association, and Duke Student Veterans, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service, and thank you for giving back. I am going to turn it over to the president of the Sanford Veterans Association, James Horn, to close this out and send us on our way.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. As far as Mark said, we really appreciate all the insight that you provided, and also just a lot of things that we didn't even expect to hear. So I really appreciate it. I hope that we can rely on you again. If at any time in the future we want to put on another event like this, we really appreciate it. We have some gifts for you. They're going to be coming in the mail. Some Duke veteran shirts and Mark has some really cool things I think you're going to like that we ordered from the store. But we're waiting for them to get personalized because we care. But then, again, gentlemen, thank you so much. And everyone in the audience, thank you so much for coming and attending. This is the first event that we've done. We want to do more. So if you have any ideas for types of events that you think that you would like more of, please reach out to myself, Mark, Gia, or James Settles, and we will do our best.
Hey, from me, I'll be brief, but please, Mark and James, feel free to pass my email to the group. If I can help with something, I get a lot of personal satisfaction. If you got a question that didn't get answered, I get a lot of satisfaction out of helping others, and you're not bothering me. And I would be happy to participate on whatever. I mean, there's a lot of things. I got like 3 pages of lessons learned for me when I got out, and they're not all applicable, but I'd be happy to share them. And I want to thank you for the Duke swag. I've been paying into the coffers at Duke for 4 years, and I haven't got crap from them other than, pay your bill, pal. So, and my son, is still searching for a job. So I'm hoping that halo of goodness from Duke will start paying some dividends, so he's not living in my basement here for the rest of my life. But so I will show him my coffee cup, and I will use it religiously. Trust me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me on, and certainly happy to help in the future. Please feel free to give out my email as well. And I guess I should say, Clay, thank you for the coffee cup.
My pleasure, bro.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. That concludes our inaugural speaker event. We look forward to hearing your feedback. We'll send out a link for feedback, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.